Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and thanks to Creative Assembly, I have a fun little reveal for you all about a piece of the upcoming new content for Total War Warhammer 3, coming in patch 6.3. As I'm sure you've already noticed, there are 20 new unusual locations that will be appearing within your campaigns, and I've been granted the privilege to show off one as of yet unrevealed location. This particular location is a little special, however, as it is one of several rare options that can be turned off in the campaign settings before beginning a campaign, such as the horror it could potentially unleash. Behold, the Crimson Skull Chambers, a location belonging to the Khorne organization known as the Cult of the Crimson Skull. These bloody-minded chaos worshippers have some dangerous plans in store for your campaigns. While I'll go into their lore in just a little bit, for now we'll start with just the flavor text, which states, "Champions of the gore-slicked chambers emerge fully fledged members of the cult, forever fermenting an ill-contained thirst for bloodshed." As I'm sure you've no doubt noticed, this cult has quite the interesting mechanic as well. Essentially, this unusual location unleashes a whopping 20 Khorne corruption and is very expensive to remove at a staggering 15,000 gold. However, so long as you keep the Khorne corruption under control at less than 50, all of your armies will receive a very nice plus 20% base damage, so your non-armor piercing damage, and plus 50% charge bonus regardless of where they may wander off to. The danger comes from if you allow the corruption to become too high, as if the Khorne corruption of the province reaches 100, the schemes of the Crimson Skulls comes to fruition. The unusual location will be immediately removed, and you will be forced to instantly declare war on 10 random factions that you haven't already. So, it could be some minor faction on the opposite side of the world, or it could be your beloved military ally and next-door neighbor. For factions with access to considerable buildings and mechanics that can build up lots of unaligned corruption, which will reduce Khorne corruption, this can be manageable. But for many factions, in fact most, they tend to either not be very good at it, or instead focus on building up their own form of corruption rather than reducing other kinds. So, how do they prevent getting dragged into a massive war by Khorne's parting gift? Well, that's where the effect Khorne Sanction comes in. Whenever you declare war on a faction, the Khorne corruption in the province containing the Crimson Skull Chambers will be immediately reduced to 0, giving you more time to either remove it or ensure proper defenses. Once again, this particular unusual location can be disabled in the campaign settings before you begin a campaign if it's something you just don't want to deal with. That buff is quite nice though, especially for those players who really enjoy using cavalry units. Now, with the Total War stuff out of the way, let's discuss just who are the Cult of the Crimson Skull. And if you're just here for the reveal, this is the part of the video if you can skip out if you don't want to hear the lore. But you should stick around for the lore. These Blood God fanatics first debuted during Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition, where they featured in the somewhat infamous Paths of the Damned adventure, which was a 3-part storyline released in 2005 following the Storm of Chaos. That adventure revealed the cult to be behind a plot to release the weakened Demon Prince of Khorne, Zaradoth the Red Flare, whose essence was trapped within 3 magical artifacts of Khorne. Players would journey through Ashes of Middenheim, Spires of Altdorf, and Forges of Nuln, which saw each of those cities feature as the arena or backdrop to the quest to stop each artifact from being fully unleashed. It's not the best storyline, to be honest, but we did get a new Khorne cult out of it. They would be far better fleshed out in the iconic and beloved Tome of Corruption, released 1 year later in 2006. This masterpiece explored a large cast of chaos topics, including cults of all the major chaos powers. The main featured Khorne cult was none other than the Cult of the Crimson Skull. Within the setting, Their origin ties back to just before the Great War against Chaos, when the Empire of Sigmar found itself quite weakened after centuries of civil war and petty politics. There were several claimants to the title of Emperor, which left opportunity for many sinister cults to try their hand at scheming to place their own puppets upon the throne. Several Chaos cults worshipping Khorne attempted to take advantage of this tumultuous era, but their overly violent methods drew too much attention from the likes of the Cloaked Brothers and Templars of Sigmar, which led to their destruction. The survivors of these raids bound together in common cause to have bloody revenge, swearing to a far more subtle strategy as they made the journey to Middenheim. Rather than forming up as relentless killers, they instead carefully wormed their way into various military organizations around the Empire, with the goal of turning said organizations against the Sigmarites wherever possible. They'd use the common soldier and noble knight as their pawns to strike against Sigmar and his priests. The cult nearly succeeded in their desire for open bloodshed in the final years of the 2200s of the Imperial calendar, when they managed to successfully infiltrate the prestigious Brotherhood of the Axe, a proud Ulrican fraternity that traces its origin to the dawn of the Empire itself. The warriors of this organization were considered the most pious and ruthless worshippers of Ulrich in his guise or understanding as a god of war above all else. Taking advantage of the already fierce hatred between the cults of Sigmar and Ulrich in this era, the Crimson Skull intended for their corruption of the Brotherhood of the Axe to be the first major step towards taking control of all the big players in the cult of Ulrich within Middenheim, up to and including our Ulrich himself. They likely would have succeeded, such was the religious intolerance stoked by the time of three emperors. But the lead founder of their cult, known only as the Blood Sipper, did not anticipate the arrival of Magnus the Pious. When Magnus somehow managed to walk through the flame of Ulrich without being harmed in a demonstration of Sigmar's divinity and power, he earned the acceptance of our Ulrich and the backing of Middenheim for the coming war against the ever-chosen Azavar Kul. This act collapsed the Crimson Skull's initial goal, but they used their hatred and fury to fuel longer-term plans. They spread their influence across the Empire, infiltrating nearly every military institution from the chapter houses of knightly orders to the town militias of rural communities. Even over 2 centuries since their founding, the Crimson Skulls ultimately seek the destruction of the cult of Sigmar and, by extension, the Empire. They venerate the iconography of the Bloody Skull and are usually represented by the screaming head of a man whose flesh has been flayed from his face. This is quite literal and forms a critical part of their religious ceremonies. Whenever they congregate, members of the Crimson Skull always make offerings to Khorne in the form of a blood sacrifice. This is followed by hours of physical combat against captives and even one another to engage in further slaughter. At the height of the ceremony, the cult members select one prisoner to serve as a sacrifice. That poor soul will be pumped with stimulants to keep them alive until the ritual is complete. First, the leader of the sect tears away the victim's face, speaking invocations in dark tongue, the language of demons, while the sacrifice thrashes and screams in agony. This is immediately followed by the other cultists approaching to carve chunks of flesh and sip upon the blood as it sprays from the victim's numerous wounds as they slowly die. The brutality doesn't end there, for the cult at the Crimson Skull, as they turn to extreme methods to venerate Khorne, need to feed their god's bloodlust while still remaining secretive. Instead of just going out and killing people wherever possible, they rely upon drinking blood, devouring raw human flesh, engaging in bloody fight clubs against one another, and spreading seeds of rage within their communities whenever possible. They keep a careful eye for individuals that are gifted in the art of dealing death and destruction, but manage to keep their most volatile emotions in check, seeking candidates that are easily seduced by violence. Even better, if they're in a natural position to despise Sigmarites, which often are both descriptors matching Ulricans. These hopeful initiates will be invited into an inner circle of whatever military organization the cult has infiltrated, inundating them with anti-Sigmar propaganda until he or she starts to spew words of hatred and spite against Sigmar of their own volition. This fire continues to be fueled until the warrior accidentally kills a priest of Sigmar, almost always orchestrated by the Crimson Skulls themselves, who set up the encounter and quietly dispose of the body afterwards. The terrified killer will now have no choice but to retreat to their so-called friends for help, which is when the cult will fully initiate the new recruit and reveal the secrets of Khorne. Any that hesitate upon learning of the Crimson Skull's true nature are immediately butchered and eaten by the rest. In regards to structure, the cult of the Crimson Skull is quite widespread and entrenched despite their relative newness compared to other major chaos cults. Each sect operates in small groups of 8, with each cell consisting of 1 cult acolyte and 7 cultists, of which at least 3 are aware of the group's truth and allegiance. The acolytes must make pilgrimage once a year to Middenheim for the Convocation of Blood, where they meet with the cult Magus. The current leader of the Crimson Skull is Boris Eichermann, a former priest of Ulrich who has a direct bloodline back to the original Tütingen chief during Sigmar's lifetime. He faked his death back in 2515 after killing 35 young women with his bare hands. A well-known cell of the Crimson Skull can be found near the busy city of Ubersreich within the province of Reichland, where they massacre... A well-known cell of the Crimson Skull can be found near the busy city of Ubersreich within the province of Reichland, where they masquerade as Ulricans within the Red Claw Monastery. The Red Claw monks are not officially recognized by the cult of Ulrich, as they were actually founded by the Crimson Skull rather than infiltrated, but their sect was carefully designed to lure in Ulricans and has had considerable success. Easily identified by their distinct robes with red-dyed sleeves, the Red Claw monks and warrior priests are quite well liked in the Duchy of Aschaffenburg due to their joyful willingness to be engaged in near constant battle with the local forest goblins of the Creeping Death tribe. While they are Khorne worshippers, their careful application of when to apply their desire for brutal violence has made them into something of local heroes, though Den Father Holst Kretschmer of Ubersreich's Chapel of Ulrich is beginning to suspect something dark hiding within the Red Claw Monastery. This cell of the Crimson Skull is made up by Abbot Hollabut and his inner sanctum of 7 monks that worship Khorne in secret, dedicating their own kills and those of the many deceived Ulricans at their monastery to the Skull Throne. That brings us to the end of all the main information about the cult of the Crimson Skull. Please do let me know what you think about their representation in Total War Warhammer 3 with the Crimson Skull Chambers. Will you be turning off their unusual location? Or are you brave enough to take on these manipulative cultists of the Blood God? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time for a pretty deep dive into patch 6.3.